So it gives me great pleasure and also a little bit of trepidation that I have the privilege of giving the last session of this wonderful event of where I've heard so many beautiful ideas, so many beautiful thoughts that have come from so many different places. I mean, this really is the epitome of diversity. We all come from very different places. We all have done very different things. And we are here talking about diversity and bringing those ideas to the table. That is for me really the star event of this whole conclave that I have experienced. So without further ado, let me just introduce myself. I am Anubhuti Banerjee. I work as the Vice Chief Information Officer at Tata Steel. I also lead the LGBTQ employee resource group called Wings at Tata Steel. I will talk more about it. And before anything else, let me start about why exactly am I here and what is my story and what is this inspiring story that has such an expansive answer to it, an inclusive India and a diverse India. I sum up my story actually with my company. My journey is the journey of transition, and the journey of steel, Tata Steel, is also a journey of transition. Anyone who knows how steel is made knows that steel doesn't come in the form that you see it. Steel comes down in the deep under the closet of dust as a red ore, which is taken out and then washed with it cleaned to almost a grueling degree, and then it passes through multiple tests. Tests where it is beaten, tests where it is put through fires hotter than Mordor, and only then does steel or does it come out shining and gleaming and strong and flexible and lustrous a thing as steel. That is the story of myself as well as for any other person who has transitioned in their life, wishes to transition in their life, and knows that they have a quality underneath them which can't be seen on first glance. It is also a journey of my company coming out of the closet from being a 100-year-old closet actually, or 150 years, wherever you start to count, because Tatas are a company that have been there for 150 years and no one came out of the closet until I did. And from then on, we've had people come out, not only in our managerial workforce, but also in our operational workforce. We've had trans people hired in mining, in manufacturing, as well as managerial workforces. We are suddenly one of the most trans-inclusive companies in India, and we've taken it as a matter of pride. And you know what makes me most happy is that the kind of competition I face from within my organization, where other people want to have more trans inclusion than even I do. And that is, I think, the best form of inclusion that I can think of. So with that, I will come to the topic that I was talking about, which is basically a future of diverse and inclusive India, and how I believe that is a journey of actually a very queer India. So the first question that comes to everyone is that, why queer? We could have, someone could say, a female India, or someone could say an inclusive India, or any other way, but why queer? The fact is, like the panel members before me were saying, we live in very queer times. And in queer times, what we need are queer leaders. An example which is also quoted is that we are having a war happening somewhere up in Europe. One side has a leader built in the form of leaders, the whole authoritarian kind of a leader that we've seen for years and years, that we try to remove, try to fight back against, but not really. We always seem to, bring them back. And the other side has a very queer leader. The other side has a leader who was once a comedian, who gives speeches in Grammys when his country is at war, who's not afraid of thinking different if it makes the difference for his country, if it gets what his country, what he wants for his country and what his countrymen want for his country. That is the kind of queerness we need in our leaders. That is the kind of courage we need in our leaders. We don't need a chest thumping kind of a courage. We need the kind of courage that helps us think in a different way and that helps us get to our means. And here again, I would put up, and we live in this what many in this room would understand something we call a VUCA world, or a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. In this world, as you know, queer people have lived lives which are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And if we are to live in a VUCA world, we need people who know about it. And I'm going to give the turn another screw, where I'm going to say that the vision that I have of a diverse and inclusion India can be solved by doing just one thing. Some people called it accept. I would not go that generic on you. I would say very simply, if you want to make a really inclusive society, all you have to do is to try and make a really inclusive society for trans people. Now you might say, why? Why just trans people? Why not everyone else? The fact is, trans people actually hold a whole microcosm of all the ills that our society has. Trans people face a microcosm of all the marginalization that a person can face in a society. I myself know in many points of time that even though I live in a constitutional democracy, every pillar of the democracy has a huge amount of bias against me. And that has been there for years. And that is something that is necessary to change. But why just stop there? When you talk about trans people, you also start talking about mental health. You also start talking about physical health and the inaccessibility of physical health for some people and the less research that happens for certain people. You also start talking about how our familial structures probably don't support everyone. How single mothers are probably looked down upon by certain familial structures that we have, or in many ways even disincluded. These are the people who we want to include. When we are talking of diversity, we are trying to include the people who are not finding their place in the society. How about some other problems? Trans people face some of the largest amount of violence that is present in a society anywhere. Trans people face discrimination in the places of their housing and even in sports, if you would believe that. And even in stories of trans people are mostly not told by trans people because, again, the same thing. So the fact is that if you can solve this one problem or create a society that is fair to trans people, it will solve the problems everyone has in this society. Now I'll come to the next part, which is something which other people also talked about and was being talked about, that what is the role of HR in all this? Like, right now I was talking about society, right now I'm talking about culture, and suddenly I bring it down to HR, and suddenly I bring it down to diversity and inclusion in this forum. So there is a very prestigious newsletter. In fact, it is the first internet newsletter called the Arts and Letter Daily. It's an aggregator of what we would call highbrow articles. Last year, or rather than 2 years back in 2020, it came out with a headline that says that today the primary aggregator or the primary organizing force behind society, more than theology, more than philosophy, and even more than politics, is HR. Excuse me. There's reasons why I tell you that. You see, we live in a society of exceptions. We look at the news and we find out something exceptional that has happened. Or even if you think of it here, you find an exceptional trans person who's coming here and speaking to you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So you find this exceptional trans person who has made their mark, who has changed, a 100-year-old company to become inclusive, who has their face in the Tata Experiential Center along with J.R.D. Tata and J.N. Tata and Mahatma Gandhi and who else. So you read about these exceptions. But the fact is that we don't live in exceptions. We live in the mundane. And HR is the one who converts all these exceptions, whatever is happening in the society, and brings it down to the mundane so that it can become a fixture in people's lives. Whether it is something like Me Too that happens, exception, and your HR comes with a prevention of sexual harassment policy. That is where you make it mundane. Similarly, we heard about all of the Black Lives Matters protests that happened, and as soon as that happened, you started having hiring differences in how companies hired. So you see, HR quite often leads the change that society needs. So therefore, do not consider yourself less powerful than any of these institutions that I mentioned, whether it's theology, philosophy, and politics, because you're probably making more difference into more people's lives than even they are able to. Now I come to, I did throw up the question is that include trans people and you solve a lot of problems. But why do we do that? And that is where I come to another quote that was here. Someone said that inclusion is having a seat at the table and equity is having everyone at a good time. But there's another thing. It's called aspiration. Aspiration is playing music so good and so, tailored to someone that they can't just help moving their feet to the music or at least tapping their fingers to it. So the whole idea of moving from a society of diversity and inclusion to a society that builds aspiration, because very honestly, if we are going to be a powerful organization, a powerful society, a powerful country, or whichever level of organization that we are thinking of, it is only aspiration that drives it. It is not, inclusion is going to be good, diversity is very good, but without the aspirations, we can't get there. And that's where we talk about why it is necessary to build these aspirations, and where people from diverse backgrounds, and especially here I'm talking about trans people, feel completely at home at the workplace. And not only that, they feel that their careers are actually being looked after by the people who have included them. Because quite often what happens in the Indian context, trans people are included in a sort of a PR slash, I would say, to some extent even a CSR kind of a view. And that is not what trans people need, and that is not an inclusive society, I'm sorry. The fact is that any business doesn't do anything without a goal in mind. So if you have to include trans people, you have to have the goal in mind that this person that I just recruited, I must be able to see them right there in the boardroom, probably as a CEO, telling us what to do. That is the kind of aspirations that trans people are looking forward to, and that is the kind of aspirations that are essential for us to go to this future that we are talking about, where we'll have a diverse and inclusive India, and not only India, I would say a whole large part of the society that we really are looking for. Now you would say, why? What are the advantages of trans inclusion? So the fact is, and I can tell you this with a very, I'll back this up with examples. Trans and marginalized people are actually the closest that you get to stargazers and future seers in the society or in the world that we have right now. Let me give you an example. Many of you use a lot of privacy protecting gear on your phones right now. You probably select an iPhone because it gives a better privacy than an Android. But 5 years back, no one was talking about privacy. We were very happy being on social media, sharing everything we had about ourselves. We are very happy visiting every site, downloading every cookie to just, have the wonderful world of this free internet that made the world the most important thing. But as a trans person, I knew that my privacy wasn't safe. I was the one who probably read through the documents that they ask you to say yes to, which quite often people just don't look into. The reason why I looked at is because I was perennially afraid that my privacy could be hampered, and that could be destructive for me. That could hamper my future forever. This was something that I always knew, and just because I knew, it wasn't enough for other people to know. But if I were a leader, or if I was a person who people listened to back at that point of time, perhaps I would have told them, perhaps I would have warned them, perhaps we would not have reached this stage at all, where perhaps all of our data is already too far out of our own reaches to ever have any control over. Let me come to the other part. The second part is that every company that is here is actually a content company. Very honestly, in the world of social media, in the world of, I'm sorry, in the world where we have to create brands, we also have to create content. And if you know that it is extremely essential in this hyper surveillance society for every brand to also know to be on the right side of history and not transgress. If a company makes a certain statement, like someone mentioning, just a small statement that is hurtful or insensitive to, say, someone trans, someone, someone who has a certain form of disability, without insight into why they're doing it, that's right there that they gain a lot of, they lose a lot of the goodwill that they might have got through years and years of hard work. You don't want that. You want leaders who would be able to identify that. I do that for my company a lot of times. I quite often make sure that the communication that goes out from us is LGBTQ inclusive, is gender inclusive, is neurodiversity inclusive, because if you're not doing that, you are actually losing out on possible goodwill which you didn't even see coming. And the third thing, and which is probably the most important, and we probably have some people from that generation here, which is the Generation Z. And the Generation Z is going to take over. And what I call the Generation Z is a generation of worktivists. Because yes, they will work, but also they'll be extremely active with their political thoughts, with their positions, especially when it relates to climate change, when it relates to inclusion, when it relates to people having, an equal, representation at the table. So in case you have a boardroom that doesn't have a queer person, doesn't have a trans person, that is an immediate red flag for someone in the Gen Z, because very honestly, a survey that came out just yesterday, this was US specific though, is that 22% of high school graduates in the US do not identify as cishet, which is cisgender heterosexual. And the fact is that the numbers are only going to increase. So if you're going to have just cis heterosexual leaders in your workplace, that becomes an immediate red flag for anyone in the Gen Z to really connect to the company. So these things would almost essentialize all of us to include trans and I would say non-binary people into our workplaces, and it is not even an alternative. Then I talk about how do we do it, and like I said, that it can only be done with a very clear goal that you want a leader from the trans and queer community in leading some part of it, making decisions where it matters, and you have career paths that correspond to that. It's not enough to just hire trans people and be happy about it. That's primarily why I'm saying that, because the fact is that if you can plant a twig in an infertile land, but it only takes a little bit of a while and a little bit of a less sun for the twig to die out and probably make that spot infertile for even longer. So the fact is that it is very necessary, we need to have these plans that if we are hiring people from marginalized community, not just the trans community, any community that we want to hire from. I think someone was talking about neurodiversity. The fact is that yes, it is good to recognize that we have neurodiverse people, but do we really have career structures that correspond to neurodiverse people? Do we really have a work structure that would help them work to their full potential according to their, the diversity that they have, rather than the structures that have worked for thousands and thousands of years, right? So when we are talking about all this, we need to understand these differences are going to come in, and with representation and with more discussion about it is only how we are going to change, begin the change. But then I flip the question back and bring out to the other part, is that what is, say, the responsibility? I'm asking everyone to include trans people. What responsibility do trans people have? So you see, trans people or marginalized people have been marginalized for so long that quite often we find our voices muffled, even if there is no one muffling our voices, even if there is no one actually telling you no. The fact that we've been told no so many times, we kind of assume that the answer to a question will be no. But the fact also remains that trans people are some of the most courageous people that you can see anywhere. Some of them have taken challenges, left their families, taken immense financial risks, which many of us would not even imagine. I mean, I know of so many trans people who live on the hope of a fundraiser that would help their, help them live the next day or live the next year out. So the fact that these kinds of challenges exist, but they believed in their gender identity, they believed in their conviction so strongly that they would take that challenge. They would take that, they would face society head on just to be themselves and just to have their ideas heard, is a wonderful thing for your workplace. I'll give you an example of my own, something that I did a few days back. We have something called an annual business plan process at Tata Steel. It has for, I think, the last 100 years always been a presentation, a PPT. Well, if PPT was invented in 100 years back, but that's just a joke. But it has always been a PPT. For the first time ever, we made a business plan that did not come from a PPT, that took data directly from the system, showed it on a dashboard, and did analytics on it. This was seen as landmark by the CEO. The CEO was immediately impressed and asked that, we want all our meetings being done like this. Why are we even doing the presentations? Why don't we have this single version of truth? The fact is that these concepts were always known, but the step was never taken until a trans person, yours truly, decided that I'm going to have this, and I don't care what kind of issues we face. I don't care how long do I have to keep people up at night to make sure that it happens. It happened, and it was appreciated. So that's really what I'm asking you to do, is to include more courage in your workplaces, to include more people who come with that courage, include more people who know that quite often, or everything that is holding you back from that next decision, the thing that you've been wanting, the promotion, the different stream of work that you want to work on, following your passion, quite often what is stopping you is yourself, is the society that tells you that, no, you can't be this, you need to have a career, you need to have a family. Right then, think like a trans person, think Like, do I want it bad enough that all of this given away, I would still do it? If yes, go for it. And that is exactly what everyone should do. And then everyone can be, a trans career, a trans passionate, a trans, ideal person. I mean, whatever ideals you grew up with, you can always transition to a completely different ideals if you find them better. So I would love everyone here to be trans people. It's not just about being transgender. There is so much transitioning to do. There is so much changing to do. We live in a society where change is extremely essential for us to keep up with it. Stability really doesn't stand a chance. So with that, I come to the absolute end is, what exactly are we looking for at the end? The end is what the ultimate goal state is, something that is called in trans circles as trans joy. It is the moment when all your struggles make sense. Everything that you've gone through has converted you into the person who's worthy of everything that they are getting right now, whether it is beauty, whether it is love, whether it is acceptance, whether it is friends, whether it is families. Trans joy is getting all of these on your terms, not because someone told you you have to be like this to get this, but you be on your terms and then get this. And that is trans joy, and that is the most purest form of joy that exists in this world. And trans joy, an example from my life was, when I got my name changed to this beautiful name called Anubhuti Banerjee, just like other people who share sweets on their weddings or, any kind of promotions or any other events, when I got my name changed, I bought a packet of sweets and I spread it and I distributed it all throughout my floor. People were surprised. This was never done before. But why not? Why can't I celebrate a huge, momentous milestone for me, just like everyone else does? With that, I finish my talk and